So today, what we're going to cover really quickly is burnout. So what exactly is it? How to spot the signs with others in your, or with people in your team or your peers, and then what to do when you notice someone is struggling, how to start kind of productive, supportive conversations with them. So there's going to be a prize for anyone, although the people in the last session may have a little bit of a head start here, a prize of my undying respect and admiration to anyone who can tell me who this guy is. Anyone got any ideas? You can unmute, you can put it in the chat. Okay, so silence. This is the gentleman called Herbert Freudenberg, who first coined the expression burnout back in the 70s. And he says that burnout is characterized by exhaustion, negativity or cynicism, which some of us may notice in our organizations, and a decreased sense of self-efficacy. And it's really about a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. That exhaustion is the real catalyst for burnout in my own personal experience and those of my clients. And it happens when people are feeling overwhelmed, drained, unable to meet the constant demands being put on them. It's not a weakness, but it really shouldn't be a badge of honor either. You know, we don't want our teams thinking that burnout is natural, healthy, normal, maybe not healthy, but natural and normal part of the work environment. It corrodes morale and engagement. If you've got a burnt out person, or if you've experienced it, you'll know how that feels. It really, really chips away at that kind of positive culture that we're putting so much effort in trying to build. It increases absenteeism. So 63% of people, 60% of people are more likely to take a day off when they're burned out. So absenteeism is going to increase massively. Turnover as well. Burned out staff are 2.6 times more likely to be looking for a new role. And when that news goes out, when people start understanding that your teams are leaving because they're frazzled, that's going to affect your ability to hire new talent as well. So it has that kind of knock-on effect. And of course, all of this hits the bottom line. The loss of productivity, the staff turnover, the loss of output is said to be in the realms of 33.5 to 43 billion pounds annually. It's massive, the impact that it's having on business. So we really, really need to do something to support our teams. In an ideal world, we would have most of our teams healthy for most of the time. So if we think of your collective well-being of your organization or your individual team as this triangle, occasionally we're going to have big stresses. So this red line is life and work. Occasionally we can have big projects which will stress the team out and it's going to put them under pressure, and you might find some members start to struggle, and their health, their productivity might dip. But usually there's enough time for them to recover and get back into that kind of thriving top third of the triangle. And that's what we want to do. But in the real world, we know that work can look a little bit more like this. And this red line has been amplified in the last 15 months because of the pandemic. We've got all the normal things about projects and business change, restructures, mergers, growth, or possibly cutbacks. But then we have this pandemic, which puts huge levels of stress for a really prolonged period of time on top of our normal stressors. And this is without considering things like the culture in your organization. Are people being encouraged to take rest, look after themselves? Are leaders modeling healthy behaviors and creating environments where people can thrive? So you've got all of these different things competing, and what's happened is that line is getting wigglier and wigglier, and the average health of our teams is sliding, and that's why we're finding this huge spike in burnout. In fact, 76% of employees are saying that they're feeling the signs and symptoms of burnout in one way or another. Incredibly complex to try and synthesize all of this into kind of 40 minutes with you today. But there are things that we can do to help our teams when they aren't at their best. And a big part of that is understanding when they're struggling and then having the ability and the willingness to have conversations with them. How are we doing so far? Oh, yes, Susan, you got it right. I just saw your, so you've got my undying attention and admiration for that. Well done. So, spotting the signs. Burnout is a real sneaky little thing, but it gives us warning signs way, way before we hit the wall. And as for types of poor mental well-being, these signs usually fall broadly into 3 categories. So it's emotional, physical, and behavioural. During my own burnout, the last one especially, I think I was sick for about a year before I got to the point where I was, lying belly down, a bit like this lady here. But I was oblivious to them. So oblivious in part and also in denial in another. And that's why it's so important that you understand what those signs are. You can use this for yourself, but especially for your team. So we're going to look at each of those 3 different kind of groups of signs so you can get a better understanding of what it might look like in your team. So the first is emotional. So you might have noticed that people are a little bit lower in spirits in your organization. Maybe they're a bit irritable, like they might just not be that kind of camaraderie that they used to be. Of course, working from home isn't going to help that, but the global pandemic is going to be sitting on top of everything, and that weighs very heavy on us, and it can start to break down what were once positive relationships, and everyone starts to be quite siloed and feels quite lonely. The next one is spiraling thoughts. Anyone here, when they're a bit worried or stressed out, start to overthink things? Me? Do you ever, okay, well, let's not use a work example. I'm looking at my cooker. So do you ever make yourself scrambled eggs in the morning, go out and think, oh, I might have left the gas on. Ooh, what if I did? And what if the house is on fire? Oh, what if I torch the entire street? Quite an extreme example, but it's a way of explaining like how when we're in a bit of a stressed out situation, we start to spiral and think the worst. So if you see someone in your team getting really het up about a small thing and jumping from A to Z without any of the other letters of the alphabet in between, it's a sign that they could be stressed out and heading towards burnout. Do any of these sound familiar to you or to your organization, or do you think that I might have left some emotional ones off? Adam, yes, if overthinking was Olympic sport, I'd be in Team GB. Yeah, me too, probably. Hair straighteners, yes, Sophie, this is a really common one. So I was using the cooker because I obviously don't straighten my hair. But yeah, exactly. It's those sorts of things, and they tend to pop up more when we are feeling stressed out because our brain is just desperate to grab onto something, you know. We just need to feel like we've got control over anything. So we will pick the smallest things to kind of focus down on. So that's emotional, but one of the 3 kind of groups of signs to keep an eye out for. And then we've got behavioral. So the emotional one isn't always so easy to see in someone else. In ourselves is a bit easier, I think, as long as we're relatively self-aware. But the behavioral one is a little bit easier to spot with people in our team. So for example, I've got introversion here, but it could also be extroversion. We're looking for changes, but generally with burnout, we tend to pull away from people. We start to deny that there's a problem, deny we need help, and we just try and keep ourselves to ourselves as a means of kind of keeping control over what's going on. Maybe you've noticed slower responses. So this could be for a number of reasons. Perhaps they've got too much on, so they just take some ages to get back to you. Or perhaps it's because they're overthinking and they're so worried about, you know, saying or doing the wrong thing that they're ruminating over that response to you. So if you've noticed that, don't automatically jump to the fact that they're ignoring you. Try and figure out what's going on underneath it. And I mentioned irritability, and I've got short fuse here. Are colleagues, you know, blowing off with each other, or being quite curt on calls or in meetings? Again, if you notice that, it could be a sign that there's something up. And another one here as well, which is not written down, but if you notice people working into the evening really often, responding to emails. Does anyone do this in the night time when we should have switched off our phone and put our laptops away? If you notice your team doing that, there's a good chance they're not switching off. And again, rest alone doesn't cure burnout. We need to think of why we weren't resting in the first place, but it will push us to that wall much, much quicker. So again, telltale signs: overworking is a really, really common cause of burnout. And then physical. So some of these you might notice because they complain about them. Other things, other times, you know, this is as much for you as it is for your team. So physical symptoms: if someone's really, really tired the whole time, could it be because they're not sleeping? This is a classic sign of someone that's under a lot of stress. Are they complaining of headaches? You see them, you know, mentioning migraines or popping paracetamols in meetings. Are they having stomach problems? Again, digestive issues, really, really common when we're stressed out. There is like science behind it, which I won't go into now. But again, if someone in your team is mentioning these things, really important that you kind of try and connect what's going on. Aches and pains, racing heart, you can't really see this or notice it from someone else, but you might have noticed it in yourself. Anyone, when you're a bit anxious about a work meeting or just generally about work, notice that kind of, you know, pitter patter a little bit harder. Again, a sign that we're under a lot of pressure and possibly we need to slow down and take a bit of a step back. But what I want to, like, if you take nothing else away from all of these three, the important thing is that you're looking for changes in your team. You know, you don't have to be the expert in all of these things. You just need to kind of be human. You need to notice whether people are struggling, and if they are, it's an indication that the foundations in your team might not be quite as they need to be, or that individual might need a bit more support at the moment than they're used to. But you don't need to be an expert. And the other thing I want you to take away is that you do not need to diagnose or therapize, I put therapies there, that should be an SE. You do not need to diagnose or therapize anyone of your team. Like, so many of us don't speak around burnout or mental well-being in the workplace because it's scary. In fact, like I think only 31% of managers talk about it, or are comfortable talking about it. I think in my experience, the number who actually do is far, far lower. So you're not alone. Your only role is to create a supportive environment. So there's bits of legislation from the Health and Safety at Work Act, or regulation, sorry, and Equalities Act. There's not time to go into that today, but all you need to remember is you need to help your staff and be human. So you're there to humanize, yes, my old friend from the Golden Girls, not therapize. So just keep that, take some pressure off yourselves. So how do you do that? How do you humanize the experience in your team so you can help them take a step back and avoid burnout? By talking. Like, you see lots of people, lots of fancy apps and fancy different, you know, strategies, this, that, and the other. But starting a conversation is the very, very first step. We have to do that so we can meet the legal requirements. We have to do that so people feel safe to speak up, so they can show their entire being at work. And it's difficult. It's hard, you know. We don't necessarily want to step on the toes of someone. We don't want to ask those personal questions as managers. So that's what we're going to try and do today. I'm going to give you some steps that you can take to start conversations if you've noticed any of those things come up in your team. I'm just looking to look at quick comments before we go into the next section. That working late is really important for managers to lead by example. Managers work late. Yeah, exactly. Modeling behavior is so important. If you're messaging your team in the night time and messaging them on a Sunday, they're going to think that that's expected. There's so many different ways that you can, if that's like when you work because of childcare or whatever else. I'm not here to kind of dictate people's hours, but we need to create kind of some bucket of kind of safety or non-work time for your teams, and they need to feel able to switch off completely when they're outside of work. I think wellbeing should be the first question in supervision, one-to-one chat with staff. Yeah, exactly. All about our part to play in making these conversations the norm completely. Yeah, I'm going to keep going. We can come back to you. So keep popping your questions into the chat box. So how do we start these conversations? So I'm just going to sip of water. Plan, invite, and then actually have the chat. It sounds silly to say kind of plan and invite. But for some reason, what I notice is that if we're having a meeting or a presentation, we will, have an agenda. We will make sure we've got a space or a Zoom room or whatever it is, and we're quite, very meticulous in planning all of that. When it comes to having an interaction, about something a bit more sensitive or personal, that all seems to go out the window. And it shouldn't. Like planning will really help us to navigate the sensitivities of the conversation and get the most out of that chat. It'll help you feel at ease as a manager, but also help the individual feel at ease because they'll see that you're prepared and, you won't have weird long silences or lots of rambling. And of course, invite them to speak with you. Don't maybe do it at their desk or do it unexpectedly. Not everyone responds very well like that. Invite them to a private, quiet space. If you're in an office, a walk around the block or a quiet cafe might be better than in the physical office. On Zoom, this is much easier often to get a quiet space for some. Ideally you'll do this as soon as you'll invite them as soon as you notice that something is up. But don't worry if you don't do it instantly. Like the ideal is you notice and then you ask them and set something the next day. But we all know real world isn't like that. Meetings come up, time passes. Action is always going to be better than inaction here. So letting them know they're supported is always going to be better than leaving it and hoping it will resolve itself. And then, of course, you go and have the chat. So you've planned what you're going to say. You've noticed what you're going to say. Noticed what's been going on. You've found a nice quiet time that works for both of you, and now you have the chat. And don't forget, before you go in or as you go into this chat, you aren't expected to be an expert or a therapist. And you can tell them that you're not an expert or a therapist. You can be vulnerable and let them know that this is the first time you've had a conversation like this, or you don't really know, the best way to tackle it. And that's completely fine. So this is a very kind of whistle-stop, bullet-pointed list of how to tackle these sorts of conversations. So a bit like you would plan and invite someone, very, very normal meeting behavior or conversation behavior is to ask someone how they are, create a little bit of rapport. Don't jump straight into all the questions and what's going on, but likewise, don't kind of beat around the bush, because otherwise you might find you talk about the soaps and the weather, but don't actually get to resolve anything. And then both of you will leave feeling a little bit like, oh, what was that about? You feel like you haven't achieved anything. They feel like they haven't been supported. So yeah, be gentle, but get to it. And then explain what you've noticed. So stick to the facts here and be as specific as you can. Don't generalize. Don't make assumptions around what's going on with them. Stick to, I noticed in Tuesday's meeting that you kept the camera off, or that you seemed to be upset when so-and-so mentioned something, whatever it might be as specific as you can. And this, you need to prepare in advance. So I'm saying, like, plan what you're going to say. And if you're comfortable, again, a bit like that's, asking them how they are and creating some rapport. Again, now you can share some personal experience. it doesn't have to be about burnout. It could be about a time when you were stressed or feeling particularly unhappy or had a challenge outside of work. Just opening up and being vulnerable can help, again, level that playing field. Don't forget that you are, no matter how flat your organisation or how open door your policies may be, you're still their manager, and lots of people can be intimidated by that. So share personal experience if you think it's relevant, if you're comfortable to do it, to try and open the door to conversation, and reassure them that it's a safe space, and that whatever's spoken about there, obviously within the reason of the law, whatever's spoken about there is safe, and they don't need to worry about it being repeated elsewhere, and it's not going to have repercussions on them. And do this with non-judgmental listening. Sounds obvious, but standing there like this, having your side on, looking away when they're talking to you, tapping your pen, all these things will just make them shut down. And also, if they share something quite personal, that it might be quite a dramatic, something quite dramatic might be going on. Try not to do this when they tell you. Again, try non-judgmental. You're just there to create a safe environment. And that's where the empathy comes in. You're there to empathise, but not to sympathise and not to pity. And please, if you've not been in their shoes, don't tell them you know exactly how they feel. I had one manager be like, oh yeah, I know exactly how you feel. And they never had any idea how I felt. And that instantly made me kind of feel like I don't feel safe to share with you, because I know that we're not on the same page on lots of this. So be genuine, because they'll see straight through it if you're not. And then encourage them to speak up. And by this, I mean, they're already speaking to you, although you initiated it. But just because you're their manager, there might be someone else that they need to have a conversation with. Perhaps it's a colleague or someone more senior, or HR, or perhaps even someone outside of work. Encourage them to speak with those people as well, or with other people, because the more conversations we have around, what's going on with us, the more supported we feel, and the easier it is to get that help and to start to feel balanced again. And then a really, really important one, and this is where I would do a full kind of mental well-being action plan with them, but we don't have time today, but message me if you want a framework for that. Ask them what they need. Don't make assumptions. We don't want a blanket approach to well-being. What works for one person doesn't work for others. What do they need? Are there too many demands? Do they need more control over how and where they work? Do they want extra support or guidance? These are three key areas in burnout, but there could be lots of other things as well. So ask what they need, and don't assume that you know. Feel free to suggest things if they're kind of struggling, but don't force them to take a solution that isn't right for them. And again, a bit like encourage them to speak up, signpost other support. So maybe you've got a therapist as part of your EAP or your medical cover. Perhaps you've got some kind of agreement with local organisations, or a coach or therapist, or maybe you can send them to their GP. If you've got those resources inside your organisation, point people towards them, because quite often we don't know they exist, or we forget about them, or we don't think it applies when we're stressed out or struggling in work. And then last thing, don't leave them hanging. There's nothing worse than going to have a chat with someone and then all of a sudden that's it, you're off, you're left on your own and nothing really gets done. So, go and go and create an invitation for a follow-up session, and let them know, I'm going to check in with you on X day, and between now and then, these are the steps I'm going to take to support you. What are you going to do to support yourself? So they know that there's some follow-up, they know they're supported, and they know there's some accountability. So next steps. Hang on, before I go on to that, has anyone got any questions here on this bit? Okay, Michelle, let's see. What do you do when an individual is in denial about being burnt out or refuses to accept help to get through it? Yeah, this is definitely a big topic. We've only got a little bit of time left. Michelle, do you want to drop me an email, or we can set up a call? I'll be happy to. But definitely, yeah, exactly. Marion, I've been that person as well. In the last talk, I shared the burnout cycle, and around the kind of 12 stages, around the bottom part of it is when we go into denials and we withdraw. And at that point, it's a case of reopening the door, letting that individual. It's going to take more than one conversation. If they're in denial, you know, you're going to have to keep going back gently. Don't go in with a sledgehammer. You go in with kind of a supportive, generous mindset. You know, can you take some things off their plate? Can you get them some coaching or some therapy, if that, you know, depending on what the needs are? Can you get them an intern or a temp in their team? What is it that is causing them? At least if they're not telling you, you have to kind of try and figure that out yourself. To be in that position, it's very difficult when someone's in denial, but it's not impossible. It just takes time and a little bit of patience. But feel free, Michelle, to drop me an email, and I'll be happy to give you some kind of a more thorough breakdown of how I would approach that. Has anyone got any other questions? You're welcome, Michelle. No problem. I think. Oh, I'm sorry. It's really hard because they're jumping up and down all the time. Well, has anyone got any questions on this framework, on how to have the chat specifically? And feel free to unmute if you want. I've seen so Diane's seen some organizations ban emails. This for me is like best practice. If leaders and managers really, really want their teams to disconnect, and they want to do more, you know, walk the actual talk, they can just switch off Slack. You can ban out of hours emails. You can remove the ability, you know, just you block the server so they can't do that. And it's rare, unless, apart from in very, very few positions, that anyone would need to do anything overnight. So yeah, I think that's brilliant. What walking one-to-ones? Yeah, walking one-to-ones are brilliant as well. And that, again, because they don't have to be opposite a table. You remove the barrier of a table, but you also remove that discomfort that some people have with being like really, really directly face-to-face with people. Oh, okay, thanks, Adam. Yeah, if anyone wants to speak, you can raise your hand, and Adam will unmute you. If there's not questions, what I thought, yeah, I agree. A blanket ban doesn't always work. So it has to be relevant for the roles. But if people, like, so for example, yesterday, Bumble announced that they were shutting down their entire organization for a week because of collective burnout. And I think it's great, but they could have taken action much, much sooner. So if things are getting out of hand in the organization, then you have to take some kind of more significant action. And that might look like enforcing some sort of, you can only work between 7 and 7 or 8 and 8. Taking into account time zones. And of course, there can be exceptions to that for people who need more flexibility because of childcare, whatever it might be. But at some point, it's very hard. You know, we need to do what works for the individuals. But if the culture isn't strong enough to let people know that they can stop working, the burnout issue is going to keep coming back, and then everyone will start working long hours again. So if there's not any, well, I'll let you kind of keep putting questions in. And I put a little, so in terms of like, what would you do next once you've had this chat? So as you know, as managers, you can speak to the individuals, but also I think having all managers trained in terms of how to create healthy work environments and how to start conversations and spot the signs of burnout or poor mental well-being and work on a more, you know, deeper level. So you're not just treating the symptoms by having conversations, you're actually looking to resolve the causes of burnout in the first place. So giving your managers trainings, and then the same with leaders. What can you do, whether it's policies on taking time off or flexible working, what can you do to make sure that the organization as a whole is healthier? And then going into teams to empower them. This is breaking down the stigma and letting them know what they can do to look after themselves as well. Again, if you're looking for support on this, please drop me an email. I'd be happy to help you. And then the last little bit, I thought, in case there wasn't any questions, I put a summary together. A scenario together, which if there's anyone who would like to work through it, we can do it in the chat together. So I'll read it out, and let's keep it, think about the framework that we just chatted through and how to speak to someone who's struggling, and think about what's going on in the scenario and how you would start that conversation with them. So you've noticed that one of your team is regularly missing team calls and meetings, and when they do attend, they're barely saying a thing or they're keeping the camera off. They seem pretty irritable, which is unusual for them. And you've also heard them saying that they aren't sleeping well. They come across as feeling pretty low, and they don't appear to be enjoying work as much as they used to. And when you've chatted with them, they've been quite hard on themselves, quite critical of other parts of the business as well. So has anyone got kind of drop some ideas on what you think might be happening there? What are the key things that stand out to you from that scenario? Shall I have a little go while you're all thinking? So we noticed in the last part that they've been quite hard on themselves and quite self-critical. If you think back to the first slide around the 3 different elements of burnout, one is about exhaustion, the other one is about cynicism, and the last one is around self-efficacy. So in this last bit, it looks like they're kind of maybe being a little bit cynical around work and being hard on themselves. That can be a sign that they don't have so much confidence, and that can go hand in hand with feeling like they aren't as effective as they'd like to be. That feeling of being pretty low can be because they're exhausted as well. So there's some real clear signs here that they're struggling with burnout. I'm just looking in there. So there's some real clear signs that they're struggling with burnout, and this is when you could pull these bullet points into the conversation and work through them. So you can explain what you've noticed, breaking it down with the very specifics that we've noticed in that scenario, and then go through those to come up with a plan to see what they need and how you can help them. Look at the last little bit. I'm coming to the end of the time, so I'm going to say thank you very, very much. And if you've got any questions, feel free to drop me them on my email here, or connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I share lots and lots of free resources there. And Sophie afterwards will be sharing a discount for workshops that I run, and I'll be really happy to answer any questions as well.
Thanks, Katie. I've actually got a question, so let's ask his question, and we've popped all your details in the chat as well.
Yeah, I've stuck this in the chat. I was asking, in the scenario that you posted, and there was that thing about you've overheard that they weren't sleeping very well. And I was wondering if you have like tips on how you avoid overstepping the boundary into just like asking personal questions about their personal life, where they might feel like you're actually sort of invading on territory that you shouldn't.
Yeah, I think brilliant question, and I put that bit in specifically because you've overheard it and they haven't said it to you directly. So in that environment or in that situation, if I had heard them and it wasn't someone had told me they'd overheard them, I would ask. So I heard you saying, you know, in a private space, where they feel comfortable, you've done all of those things to kind of open up the conversation to start, but I wouldn't make any assumptions over why they're not sleeping. I wouldn't put words in their mouth. I wouldn't, if I asked and they didn't want to respond, I wouldn't push the question again, because they haven't come to me to share that information. But if I'd heard it personally come out of their mouth, then I would definitely ask that question as a manager, because I would care. Because poor sleep is a real sign that something's up, that we're worrying, that we're overworked, that we're stressed out, that our well-being isn't where it should be.
Okay,
Awesome.